When Sonic Frontiers released, I was determined to jump as few times as possible. It took some effort, but I did eventually reach the credits with a satisfying jump count like 6 months ago. The problem is that my original script was over an hour long and, in my opinion, super boring. So to fix that, I'll be cutting down a lot and keeping things pretty speedy. So without further ado, it's time to answer the question, can you beat Sonic Frontiers without jumping? There will be spoilers. Following one of the many cutscenes we'll be skipping past, Sonic finds himself in cyberspace. Since we don't want to jump, I rebound the act of jumping to right on the D-pad, which is a separate binding than confirm, so if we ever need to use right on the D-pad, we'll know that that is wrong. Everything else is fair game, which is great, because partway through this level, we'll need to use Sonic's Stomp Bounce move along with some air boost to get past this ledge. A little farther, we can get past some ledges by homing attack enemies without being airborne, unlike in Sonic Adventure, which will help us throughout the playthrough, as will the bouncing. Outside, we'll be running and skipping past just so much tutorial information. There's combat, which almost never requires jumping. It can help, but it's not necessary. There's ledges where one is expected to jump, but we can boost off all kinds of little rocks and ledges to get airborne. Unlike in cyberspace, out in the world, Sonic can go really high and really far with these boost launches. Before long, we've gotten our Psy-Loop ability, and we take down our second Guardian and head into our second cyberspace stage. There is a really cool way to skip needing to do this stage, but it requires a jump, so instead, I bounce boosted my way towards the goal. There was a bit of rail grinding, where thankfully, Sonic can actually transfer between rails with the analog stick, which isn't the jump button, so it's fine. Again outside, I decided to use our Psy-Loop ability to grind out enough rings to activate Power Boost, which lets us run at max speed while out in the open world. With that, and the fact that combat is almost never a limiting factor for this challenge, we don't need to upgrade our speed, ring capacity, strength, or defense. So we can just ignore those collectibles and all of the cute little Coco. And on Chronos specifically, we can also ignore basically everything else, because there are multiple ways to get out of bounds and activate the boss fight without ever saving Amy or collecting any of the first 6 emeralds. That said, in my original playthrough, I didn't know about any major skip until reaching Island 3, so I can personally confirm that if played correctly, Chronos Island requires no jumping. Just a lot of boost launching, bouncing, and time. In order to skip this island, I will be collecting a few quick levels, which is pretty easy, just about everything gives us experience, but there are multiple barrels filled with the stuff. After that, I unlock the air trick ability, which is neat, and the stomp attack, which allows us to perform the aforementioned glitch. This technique was originally found by Darkspine Sonic, and we call it the DSS. And Vorg in the beta used the DSS to reach the Giganto boss arena early, which is called the Hedgehog Space Program, or HSP. To perform a DSS or the HSP, you just lock onto an enemy, dodge, initiate the stomp combo, and then interrupt the automated movement to get a boost. When timed properly, you get sent upwards, higher and higher depending on how close to frame perfect you were. This is super broken, and since it doesn't require a single press of the jump button, it's totally legal. But there are more techniques to discuss before reaching the credits, so the video doesn't end here. That done, I fell into the arena, moved through the trigger to activate the boss, On to Ares, this island is also pretty broken. While a little bit more legwork is required, we can still skip to the fight against the Titan pretty quickly. First, we have to talk to Knuckles, and then with 30 memory tokens, talk to him again to free him. I just went around and side looped random dig spots until I had enough. Next, we collect enough vault keys to unlock the first emerald, which can be done by collecting some portal gears and then completing some cyberspace challenges. There are other ways to get keys, but this isn't too bad. I visited 2-2, which is a fun if challenging stage to play through while not jumping. Mistiming a bounce can send Sonic directly to his death, but that's fine. There's no penalty for restarting the stage except time. As prep for this video, I re-attempted it, and I got an S rank after a couple of tries, so I haven't completely forgotten how to play the game. If I were to complete all of this stage's challenges, which is possible jumpless, I could go directly to the vault, but instead, let's detour over to Strider because it looked at me funny, and lets me show off a little bit more about this game. So, while this gardening seems like it's kind of a soft lock without jumping, the game does throw us a bone, because once we've landed on one of the smaller rings, lighting it up automatically moves Sonic in and onto the next ring until we reach the main set of 3. While jumping would help avoid the energy attacks, we can instead easily rail swap with the analog stick, or just tank damage until all rings are complete, at which point we're automatically dropped onto the arena, where, after a bit of combat and maybe another cycle, it's dead, and I get a portal gear, which I use to go into 2-1. Like I said, this isn't strictly necessary, but it lets us look at more jumpless options. This one is a side-scroller, so it's harder to circumvent obstacles. Sometimes we'll run into tiny ledges like this, but have no fear. If there are any rings nearby, Sonic can always perform a lightspeed dash by clicking in on the left analog stick. And actually, you can do this with just about any collectible, and even spam it a little like in this clip. It's not useful, but neat. I should note, since we're skipping past a lot of the cyberspace stages in this video, we won't see some of the more interesting methods that are required for jumpless completion because I did test all of them. If you want to see a video dedicated to jumpless cyberspace, let me know in the comments below. For now, let's go visit that Emerald Vault, which kicks off an escape sequence with Wyvern, the Titan. Here, taking damage and running into stuff is our biggest worry, and while it seems daunting, it's not too hard to reach the end without jumping. Now, if we boost launch our way over to the boss arena, we can step through another trigger, like so, which starts the boss battle. While jumping would help, it is not necessary to reach to the top of the tower because these sticky walls don't require jumping to get onto. You also don't need to jump while running along the energy path. The boss, again, much like with Giganto, is jumpless.
Now hurry up and save the day already.
Now that we reached Chaos Island, things get actually difficult. Even to this day, there doesn't seem to be any way to skip directly to the boss fight, so we'll have to go through things mostly like normal. So let's go down the list and discuss our obstacles. As for enemies, Shinobi and Excavator are upgraded versions of the Ninja and Tower Guardians respectively, which require no jumping. Fortress is doable, as rail switching uses the analog stick, and while it can be annoying to get onto the rail in the first place, it's very doable. The only enemy we can't deal with are actually the flying birds, which remind me of the Pokemon Skarmory. Skarmories shoot out lasers which are easily parried, but the issue is that attempting to attack them locks Sonic onto their horizontal bar, which requires a jump to escape, so we won't be fighting nor riding any of the birds. For the same reason, we can't use a number of the paths across the islands, as there are annoying horizontal bars and cannons mixed in. Fortunately, we can always perform a DSS or boost launch to get across to the various islands. That said, there is still one island that's out of reach with this trick, but we'll get to that before long. For now, the stages. Every stage is accessible, and while most are doable, one of them is impossible to complete jumpless, that being 3-6, a very annoying, obnoxiously long side-scrolling stage with numerous places to fall. With careful bouncing and with the use of a speedrun trick called magnet dashing, or a mag dash, it is possible to get to this point where we seem to hit a roadblock. These walls force Sonic to wall jump back and forth, and without any way to get over this gigantic wall, this level is not happening. In other news, 3-1, 3-3, 3-5, and 3-7 are all jumpless and require no new strategies. 3-2 is jumpless, but only if we break the game a little bit. When playing normally, at least for this challenge, we'd run into a roadblock near the bottom of the circular section because this cannon requires a press of the jump button, and nothing else seemed to get me to where I needed to go. Thankfully, speedrunners found that it's possible to break out of the 2D limitation, so to speak, by stomping right over hitting this spring, and then perform a mag dash to go directly to the goal, skipping all that stuff. It's fast, jumpless, and it looks pretty cool. Lastly, 3-4 is very annoying because it's full of rails with plenty of spikes and lasers that we're forced to touch since there's no other way to gain height without jumping while on a rail. Thankfully, it is doable, but beating the stage jumpless requires upgrading our defense stat to a pretty high amount, which I did for science. Now it's time to discuss the emeralds. The blue emerald vault can be reached easily enough, but a problem arises immediately after.
What will you do?
Collecting the blue emerald leads directly into the shield escape sequence where Sonic must run along a squid's trail to escape the Night Titan's deadly spinning shield. This is an auto-running 2D section where we cannot dodge left or right. Since we cannot bounce during this section, we must power through all of the attacks that come at us from the squid while avoiding the shield at all costs because that is instant death. During my first playthrough, I was on hard mode, so I didn't get very far. I dropped it to easy, raised my defense, and shifted all of my useless speed levels to almost mostly useless ring capacity, which allowed me to get far enough to locate yet another issue. At a certain point, the spinning shield comes at Sonic from the front, and the only way to avoid it would be to jump. I thought that this jump was required for quite some time, but I kept a save file on hand in case I ever wanted to retry the sequence. And about 30 hours into my playthrough, I revisited this escape sequence, and surprise, jumping is not required. All it took was for me to discover a brand new speedrun skip. I posted a video going over this discovery way back when it happened, but for a quick rundown. As previously shown and mentioned, Sonic can launch himself quite high and far while boosting off of certain bits of terrain. While experimenting, I found that I could launch myself up into the air and then forward away from the shield and over the invisible walls. It's pretty hard to do reliably, but after some more testing and attempts, I was able to get out and over to the mainland without jumping, at which point I could reach the squid's destruction cutscene trigger and thus skip the shield escape sequence jumpless. Not only does this trick avoid a jump, shield escape skip allows speedrunners to save time by gathering purple coins, some memory tokens, and unlocking a portal, all while the squid travels along to the end of its route, which makes for a pretty good time save, so it's still being used in runs to this current day. I just wish it wasn't so annoying to get the initial launch. Afterwards, our next goal is to meet back up with Tails, whom can be found at the north end of the Crescent Island. You're supposed to reach him using a bunch of platforming, but I don't want to do that, and it might take a jump. So instead, I did these two boost launches. Next, we head north even farther to meet Tails again, who wants to use the derelict Eggman machine, which is activated with a little bullet hell minigame. That done, the Death Egg sends out a blast that rips open a way into the subterranean pathway, which is how you're meant to travel to the island containing the Red Chaos Emerald. This pathway is a problem because at the end of it, we are forced to traverse up a spiraling section that is entirely in 2D, which forces you to jump to get past some rails. Much like with Shield Escape Skip, I spent hours workshopping the idea. For example, I found that you can dodge as you hit the springy pole, which launches Sonic far enough to get onto the upper rail, which means a single jump could work, but that wasn't good enough. Likewise, a single jump could let us pilot a Skarmory all the way over to the Red Emerald Island, but again, that's not good enough. I eventually learned that there are other glitches to launch Sonic high and far enough to reach the island, including a DSS, which I couldn't quite get to work, so I settled on another personal discovery. If you boost launch up and to the left from here, then boost back to the right, you can just barely land back on the path past the 2D camera and movement lock triggers. So since we have proper 3D controls all the way up, we can boost bounce all the way to the Emerald jumpless. Afterwards, we meet up with Tails again for a quick chat.
Hey.
And then meet him again over by the lava. Here we must help gather scraps to rebuild a cannon, which means doing our first minigame of the video. We have to destroy a number of boxes scattered across platforms floating above the lava, and you have to actually touch all the little particles to collect the parts, which can be a bit difficult and annoying. You don't have much room for mistakes, and you're on a timer, but with a few attempts, I got it done jumpless, earning the green emerald. Afterwards, we have a couple more meetings with Tails before we're told to visit him by the raised bridge. This kicks off a skydiving minigame where you're racing against the clock for some reason to reach the switch on the other side. It's also very annoying, but it doesn't require any jumps, earning the Scion Emerald. Now the last goal before seeking out the Titan is to obtain the Silver Emerald, which can be found atop one of these spirally platforms above the main island, which you're expected to platform all your way up there. It's quicker and arguably easier to just perform a DSS to launch Sonic high into the air and simply fall onto the Silver Emerald Vault. At last, we can then visit Tails near the mysterious purple door, which haunted me for hours, to find an ancient relic, Pinball. Really though, with how long it took me to get to this point, it was a welcome change of pace. I just wish that the score required to continue on wasn't so dang high. Once we head back outside, the lava flow burns away the clouds, revealing the area in which we can fight the Knight, which, much like the previous Titans, requires no jumping, just some over-the-top action. Now we find ourselves at Rhea Island, which is actually the previously inaccessible upper area of Kronos Island. Here we're tasked with climbing and disabling 6 towers, which should bring down the wall between the real and cyber worlds, or something like that. For our purposes, there are 6 annoying platforming challenges, which we will number like so while looking at the map. The first tower, meant to be the easiest, starts out simply enough. Springs lead up to some platforms which lead to springs, then balloons and pulleys. We can get quite a ways up, but at a certain point the platforms get far enough apart so that we can't clear the distance with just boosts and bounces. While I was trying to figure out Rhea Island, I had actually killed all of Tower 1's enemies, and then I saved, which was a bad idea because I had to wait for a starfall to respawn all of the enemies, at which point I could reach the top by just performing a DSS. It's that simple. Tower 2 is a bit more complicated, so let's look at what we're working with. The tower can be seen as having 3 distinct parts, as there are 3 shortcut pulleys that you unlock at certain heights. Reaching the first pulley without jumping is quite easy. Afterwards, reaching the second pulley poses some issues. There are 2 intended routes, and both funnel Sonic onto rails between 2 boosters, which is a jump-based softlock. At bare minimum, we could jump once to get to these balloons, and then a second time to hit the pink trick ring. Afterwards, the rest of the path up is tricky but jumpless, so it's just this section that we have to deal with. Eventually, what I realized was that if we were to boost launch over from atop Tower 1, I can actually land on this platform, and then all I have to do is avoid touching any rails or dash panels and reach the pink boost ring. It sounds easy in concept, but it took me like 20 minutes of attempts, and eventually, now let's get past Tower 3 and head straight to Tower 4. Tower 4 is located in the Giganto Arena, and this is the combat-focused one, as there are a bunch of enemies spread throughout. I tried scaling this normally, but at a certain point, I just couldn't get any higher. My solution ended up being the exact same one as the speedrun, just DSS to get all the way to the top in one go. This was actually the first tower I completed jumpless, and I should note that at the top, you actually have to destroy the enemy to power down the tower. But again, since I had spent so much time on this challenge, there was a starfall and the enemy respawned, which is great because we actually need it to perform a DSS to get even more height, which is just enough to reach the exit platforms of Tower 3. And boom, Tower 3 is done without any of that icky jump-based traversal. Onwards, Tower 5 is a tricky one. Yet again, I couldn't get to the top without jumping, and yet again, the DSS can get us to where we need, but not very easily. You see, we can side loop this spot to spawn a spring, which gets us up near a floating enemy next to a platform. With the nearby enemy, we could perform the DSS, but we're sort of locked into 2D movement, which makes it seemingly impossible. This can be circumvented by using the first spring, landing on the second spring's platform to reset your air boost, boost away, then parry to stop your momentum just after the camera is unlocked. Now you can home back in on the spring, and as long as we don't land back on the ground or use the ground spring, the camera is in our control. And then spend like 30 minutes and 15% of your soul to pull off a DSS right to the tower's top. Lastly, Tower 6 requires one more DSS launch, but getting to the enemy requires careful boost bouncing off of these tiny platforms. Compared to the previous one, it's not too bad. But wait a second, while I was wrapping up the editing for this video, Sega released the Sonic's Birthday Bash update, which among other things included adjustments to the Raya Island towers if you play on easy mode. This is the first update for Sonic Frontiers that actually affects a jumpless playthrough, so let's go over it. I won't detail every difference, but in general, the towers have been made easier and more accessible, with added orange balloons over gaps, and to help you circumvent enemies, as well as springs in place for some of the rail traps where normally you would have had to just jump. Tower 1 can be completed jumpless without any glitches, as balloons are there to help you all the way up. The problem section in Tower 2 is made a little easier, but you still need to do some creative launching to get past the section. Tower 3 is more accessible and we can get higher without jumping, but still run into a roadblock here with the sticky walls and rings. I know it doesn't look like much, but trust me, I tried for a while, I couldn't find a way, so this requires the same strategy as before. Tower 4 is substantially easier, as you can balloon pop your way past most of the enemies, no DSS needed. The experience for Tower 5 is just like Tower 3, it's easier, more accessible, but we still run into roadblocks that require glitches to circumvent. And Tower 6 becomes an easy breezy jaunt, no launches required. After we deactivate the final tower, this happens. So his friends sacrifice themselves or something, and we're onto the final island. When it comes to Ornos Island, there doesn't seem to be any way currently to skip collecting the emeralds, but still, we don't actually need to participate in any of the expected activities because this game is kind of poorly balanced. You see, each island has a portal that leads to a fishing pond run by Big the Cat. Unlike in Sonic Adventure, fishing in this game is very simple. We just cast somewhere and then press the confirm button when the rings overlap. This provides fishing tokens which we can spend on Eggman memos, seeds, keys, cocoa, all that stuff. Casts on Ornos Island cost 8 purple coins, but it's well worth it, as we can use the various rewards to avoid rolling around at the speed of ground. To beat Ornos and head to the final battle, we need 33 vault keys and 190 memory tokens, which can be earned after about a half hour or so of fishing, so no jumping needed. Even better, the blue, red, yellow, and cyan emeralds are all out in the open, easily reached without jumping, while the green and silver emeralds are still reachable, but require a quick game of off-brand Galaga. After that last silver emerald is collected, Eggman hands us the 7th Chaos Emerald because I think he's impressed with how far we've gotten without jumping. And then Super Sonic zooms over to fight Supreme. Nothing new is expected of us, so of course, no jumps are needed.
Is that it?
I must leave you.
I don't even know who you are.
Afterwards, what comes next depends on your current difficulty choice. On hard, you'll witness Supreme, now controlled by that small sassy child, turn into a ship so that we can play through a long sequence where we dodge shots while attacking a purple planetoid called the End, and we hear its spooky voice saying spooky things.
Struggle as so many have done before. My captors built a whole reality to contain me.
Now or never!
Having reached the credits, we can answer the question, can you beat Sonic Frontiers without jumping? Yes. Yes, you can. It just takes some creative routing, defying the laws of gravity, and a determination to never once see the drop dash. Like many others, I do think the game has its issues, but I also think it's pretty fun, and hopefully that fun translated into this video. That said, thanks for watching. Big thanks to my channel members for the support, and a Titan-sized thanks to Captain Crayfish for being a super fan. I have other Sonic challenges you can check out on my channel, as well as a host of glitch videos on Sonic games, as well as just all kinds of stuff for Mario, Zelda, and more. So check those out, consider subscribing. That's it for this one. Bye-bye.